Welcome to the Psalms of the Bible, being refreshed and strengthened in the Psalms, Volume 3, which covers Psalms 90 to 119. My name is Nancy Gemaehlich, and I'm the author. And today we're going to be discussing Week 1 from your study guide. So I'd like to begin with a review and overview, so that we can all kind of be on the same page. In case you didn't do Volume 2, this might be helpful to you. So in Volume 2, my previous study guide, the Psalms of the Bible, we finished out that study completing Book 3 of the Psalter. So let me say that the Psalter, or the Book of Psalms, is 150 Psalms, but it's been divided into 5 separate books when the editor put it together the way that we have it today in our Bibles. And so these Psalms were written over 1,000 years by some various authors, mostly David, and yet an editor at a point in time, possibly Ezra, after the captivity in Babylon, put the book of Psalms together the way that we have it. And he did it in 5 books, and you'll see that noted when you go through the book of Psalms. So in my previous study, Volume 2, we completed Book 3 of the Psalter. And so what I'd like to do is go back and read the overview, which is on page 3 of your study guide, so that we can see where we've been from Volume 2, what we covered. So the overview says, Book 3 anticipates Israel's exile. This book is known as the Dark Book of the Psalter. Here, Israel's kings, the house of David, fail, and the sanctuary is destroyed. This book climaxes in Psalm 89 and its lament of the seeming collapse of the Davidic covenant. And so that's where we were in the previous volume. When we got to Psalm 89, it's the climactic psalm from Book 3, the Dark Book of the Psalter. Let me read you a little bit from that so you can get the idea. So from Psalm 89, verse 46, we read, "How long, O Lord, will you hide yourself forever? Will your wrath burn like fire?" And then down a little in Psalm 89 to verse 49, the psalmist says, "Where are your former loving kindnesses, O Lord, which you swore to David in your faithfulness?" And you can see that they were at the climactic time in their history of wondering what happened to God's promises, that someone from the line of David would sit on the throne of Israel forever. And you can find that promise in 2 Samuel 7. And so that's where we were in the last volume of the Psalms of the Bible. Now we are in this study, the Psalms of the Bible, Volume 3. And it begins with Book 4 of the Psalter, which is Psalms 90 to 106. So as you opened your study guide this week and began going through the Psalms, you began in the first part of Book 4 with Psalm 90. So let's look at the overview for Book 4 of the Psalms. It's on page 3 of your study guide. Again, I'll read it to you. Book 4 is oriented to Israel in exile. She has no king. But here the Psalms fall back on God in trust that He is their King. Hope is still alive because God is Israel's eternal refuge. Or you could say, God is Israel's eternal dwelling place. Same thing. So, like each book of the Psalter, each one starts with a different author. And this book 4 of the book of Psalms opens, it's a psalm by Moses. And how appropriate that book 4 starts with a psalm by Moses, the only psalm in the book of Psalms that's attributed to Moses. And it's so appropriate because Moses knew what it was like for the Hebrews to suffer under a foreign government, as what happened in Egypt. Moses also knew what it was like for the Israelites to wander in the wilderness, longing to be in the promised land, but wandering due to disobedience. And so he writes the opening psalm, Psalm 90. We find in Psalm 90, verses 1 and 2, it says this: Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you gave birth to the earth and the world. Even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And you can imagine that how true that and how important and poignant that statement would be when they are off the promised land. They're out of Jerusalem. The temple's been destroyed. They're exiles. How important to recite and to remember, to bring to mind, to stir faith by saying that God has been Israel's dwelling place in all generations. So a great opening line there. And then it goes on to speak of the brevity of man's life due to the fact that we're sinners and God is a holy God. We come from the dust, we go back to the dust. And Psalm 90 really highlights the eternity of God, yet the brevity of man born into sin. It's a very sobering psalm. In verse 8, it says, You have placed our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. So Moses could feel the heat of God's searching light and all those who shared this psalm upon them. They were in exile due to their disobedience. And then Moses goes on in the psalm and he asks God in verse 15, So teach us to number our days that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. So looking at the bare bone facts of man's depravity and God's awesome holiness, Moses has this request. He wants to number his days. He wants to make each one count. He wants to live each day for God. He knows that he can't take time for granted or his life for granted. And he wants to have a heart that's wise, that fears God. So you can see from Psalm 90 that Moses, as the psalmist, has humbled himself. And as I said, it's a very sobering psalm, and it's meant to be. It's meant for us to stop and do an accounting and a reality check. However, not only did Moses know that we're sinners and God is holy and awesome, but he also knew some other things about God that are so important. He knew them like he knew them like he knew them. And that is that God is merciful and he's compassionate. So even in Psalm 90, Moses asked God to return to them and to show them his loving kindness, which in Hebrew is hesed, and it means covenantal love or loyal love. So he's calling on the character of God and the promises of God to be kept because of the very compassionate nature of God. And those are things we must know too. Not only that we're sinners saved by grace and that God is holy and awesome, but the character of God, his loving kindness, the promises he has given us, that because of his character and his loving kindness, he will not fail to keep. So Moses was asking God, come show us that covenantal love. Return to us. Be merciful to us. Return to us not because we deserve it or we earned it, but because you're gracious. So as I said, it's so essential for us as believers in every age, including our own, to know God according to his word. Not just the sides or facets or characteristics of God we like, but to really know him. And that's what we learn by studying the Bible. So we know that he's righteous and he's holy and he's awesome. He's almighty. We know that we're sinners saved by grace, and that we want to take advantage of a psalm like Psalm 90 to humble ourselves like Moses did, and to realize the brevity of our days so that we don't take our lives for granted and just bump along doing our own thing, but that we gain wisdom, which begins with the fear of God. And that's what Moses was doing, and that's what we can do as well. Our life is but a vapor and dust to dust. But we also must know, as I said, that God is merciful and he's faithful to do all things that he has promised to do. So when we find ourselves face down in the dust, like Moses was, humbling ourselves before our holy God, we want to remember to run to him, not away from him when we experience trouble, because he loves us and he's good. So our second psalm from this week, it's the second psalm in Book 4 of the Psalter, is Psalm 91. And many psalm scholars consider Psalms 90 and 91 as connected. They have many themes that connect them. Some Jewish traditions consider that Psalm 91 is written by Moses as well. The Bible doesn't tell us that, but I can see why they make these connections. Psalm 90 tells us that it was written by Moses. Psalm 91, we don't know the author. But as sobering as Psalm 90 is, Psalm 91 is encouraging. It reads as if Psalm 91 is the answer to Moses's Psalm 90, his petition, his bemoaning the harsh realities of life. So let me give you some comparisons of some of these links between Psalm 90 and Psalm 91. So Psalm 91 started with, "Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations." And then Psalm 91 says, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty." So it's like the answer. If you dwell in God, you dwell in his shadow, in his safety, under his wings. He will take care of you. Another example, Psalm 90, verses 13 and 14 says, "Do return, O Lord. How long will it be? And be sorry for your servants. Oh, satisfy us in the morning with your loving kindness, that we may sing for joy and be glad all of our days." And then Psalm 91, 14 and 15 is God speaking. And he says, "Because he or she," I'll insert that as well, "because he or she has loved me, therefore I will deliver her. I will set her securely on high because she has known my name, my character. She will call upon me and I will answer her. I will be with her in trouble." So you can see this beautiful response of Psalm 91 to the agonies, the sobering realities of Psalm 90. So that gives you some idea how they're linked. And when we think back about the Israelites, we can see through Psalm 91 that they are renewing their relationship with Yahweh. Yes, they've been exiled, but they are renewing their relationship with Yahweh. So as we move on to this week's Psalm 92, we again see a mention about this idea of dwelling in him, God being our dwelling place. Psalm 92:13 says about the righteous that they are planted in the house of the Lord and that they will flourish in the courts of our God, that we will flourish in the courts of our God. And that's, again, that idea that we are hidden in him. Our life is in him. We dwell in his presence. We can come boldly into his presence. And that's where our life is, no matter where we find ourselves. The Israelites found themselves in exile. They were back wandering the desert. Later in history, they're in exile in Babylon. And yet God is their dwelling place in every generation. And the same is true for us today. No matter where we find ourselves or how tough of a situation we find ourselves in, God is still our dwelling place. And He will hide us in the shadow of His wings. Psalm 92 is such an encouraging psalm. I hope this week when you studied it that you were greatly encouraged by it. I know I was. How it talks about our flourishing. In the NASB that I was studying out of, uses that word flourishing twice. It talks about us as being planted, as having sap and greenness, and bearing fruit even into old age. That these are the things that the people of the Lord should look forward to and experience. And it doesn't mean that hardships don't come, but it does mean that we can dwell in Him and experience His goodness and produce fruit for Him no matter where we are. I want to also point out that in Psalm 92, at the beginning of the psalm and the end of the psalm, there is this matching emphasis. And usually when you see that, it's something that the psalmist wanted to emphasize and to connect with. And in Psalm 92, it's that we will declare or proclaim God's character and His goodness and His righteousness. So we are blessed as the people of God to declare, to proclaim His goodness, who He is in the world. What a privilege we have. And then we come to our fourth psalm from this week, and that is Psalm 93, and it's a kingship song. And the reason it's a kingship song, because it talks about Yahweh as king. It begins saying, "The Lord reigns. He is clothed with majesty." And it continues down in verse 2, "Your throne is established from of old." So you see these kingship words about reigning and His throne, because there's nobody sitting on the Davidic throne at this time. Israel is wondering what happened to the Davidic promise, but they're looking up and they're coming to realize in their chastisement, in their exile, that God is still on the throne and He is still their king, even in their challenges. Futato, a Psalms scholar, writes this. He says, "This group of refuge or dwelling place and kingship psalms provides the heart to the answer that was raised back in Psalm 89 in that time of crisis. Where are your former loving kindnesses, O Lord?" The psalmist wrote back in 89. And now we roll into 90 and 91 and 92 and 93. Futato is saying that these psalms answer that question. God is there. They need to just simply look up and know that He is on the throne. He is with them, even though they are experiencing exile. And Futato goes on to say that this group of psalms they affirm the main message of the Psalter as a whole. The Lord is King. Blessed are all who take refuge in Him. Or you could say, blessed are all who dwell in Him. So in Israel's history, though God chastised His people through captivity in Babylon, He never forsook them. It's important for us to know. In fact, He wanted them to humble themselves and to draw back to Him, to come back to Him, that He could restore them. They were kicked out of the promised land because they'd lost their way. They'd lost their way of worshiping Yahweh and following His word. So God wanted them to come back. Yahweh was their king from everlasting to everlasting. They simply needed to look up. Their redemption was drawing near. And now, in our times, later in history, we look back to the cross, when God sent His Son to die, to be the final sacrifice for sin that makes us holy and righteous. Because of Jesus' death on the cross, when we receive Him, we are washed, we are cleansed, we are made holy and righteous. Therefore, we can enter into the throne room of our holy God. And so we look forward to Jesus' second coming. He's going to come again as King of Kings, and he's going to rule and reign on earth in righteousness. And we look forward to that. And Jesus had some instructions for his believers before he was crucified and resurrected. And he was saying to them about his second coming and about the signs of his second coming. He said, "But when these things begin to take place, straighten up, lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." And so still in our times, we want to look up and know that Jesus is coming back as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And Yahweh will always be our eternal King sitting on the throne. And we can trust in that no matter where we are, no matter how far we might think we've drifted from God. He is there waiting for us to humble ourselves and come back to him. So let's go ahead and close with a brief prayer. Lord God, I thank you for your word that's ever an encouragement for us. Even the parts that call us to account provide hope and answers that we need to trust you for our lives now and in eternity. I thank you that you have been our dwelling place for all generations and always will be. Thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for being with me today.